Peter Tobin was evil. Multiple murders, a very violent and aggressive personality, and a careless attitude towards those whom he killed. This is his story. To start, little is known about Peter Tobin's youth, other than a few details. Born in Johnstone, Renfrewshire, Scotland, on August 27, 1946, to Daniel Tobin, an engineer, and Marjorie Tobin, a housewife. The Tobins were a large family, a total of 8 children, Peter being the youngest. Peter's brother Robert described Peter as a bit wild in his younger years. At age 7, Peter was sent to a reform school. A reform school was a detention center for children and teenagers. These places were sometimes brutal, and where some very extreme children were housed. Whether Peter Tobin changed from an innocent child to something more sinister at this point is pure speculation. However, what is known is that at reform schools, bad things happen to children. Real bad things sometimes. Years pass, and in the late 1960s, Peter was in his mid-20s, and he was looking for a wife. One evening, he attended a ballroom dance at the Glasgow Town Center with a friend of his. They scouted out the ballroom for local girls, and looked for ones they liked and went up to them and asked them to dance. Peter, after some time, became fixated on this young, innocent-looking woman who was sitting with a friend of hers. He gave his friend a little nudge and nodded in the girl's direction, asking his friend if he's interested. The girls soon took notice and began giggling. This was Peter's cue, and he and his friend walked up to the 2 girls. Peter took one of the girls by hand and introduced himself. When leading her to the floor, the woman introduced herself as Margaret Mountney, and soon they became a couple. They went on many dates that consisted of car rides to the banks of Loch Lomond. There, they would picnic and simply spend time with each other. Margaret Mountney spoke of these events saying, "We watched the waves going along the water, we had tea, sandwiches, and just laughed. We would lay back and look into the skies and just hope it never ended. He was so gentle, so kind. He never laid a finger on me. Even when he took my hand, it was gentle. You never thought that somebody as gentle and kind as he was would turn into the monster he eventually became." 2.5 months go by, and in 1968, Peter asked Margaret if she wanted to go back to his flat in Glasgow, and she said yes. Peter drove straight there and led Margaret to the kitchen, where he prepared her tea, and they all sat down and talked as they always did. As the conversation went on, it began to get dark outside, so Margaret told Peter that she had to leave because she had a curfew at 10 p.m. Peter said, yes, of course, but just another minute, we'll have another cup of tea. Margaret said that she really needed to leave, so she grabbed her belongings and walked to the front door and opened it. But before she stepped foot outside, Peter threw his arms over her shoulder and shut the door. This was the start of Margaret's prison sentence. Peter would lock her in her flat for weeks at a time, never letting her leave. As the long weeks went on with little to no interaction with family or friends, it became lonely for Margaret. When Peter went out, he would lock Margaret in the bathroom. It was a miserable time for her, and Peter recognized this, so one evening, he brought home a black Labrador puppy, or Boot, as she called it. For the first time since being held in the flat, she said she smiled. But the smile didn't last long. One day, Margaret was in the flat, locked up, when she heard kids laughing and playing soccer in the backyard of Tobin's flat. She walked over to the kitchen window, looked down, and saw the kids playing, but she spotted something peculiar, and she studied it, and eventually wide-eyed came to the realization that it was Boot, her dog, laying there still. She then looked over to the kids playing, and saw that they were kicking Boot's head back and forth. Then, the doorknob suddenly began to move, and Peter opened the door and saw Margaret's shocked face and approached her. He turned her around so that she was face to face with him, pulled out a knife and stabbed her in the side. Margaret screamed, and Peter pushed her on the bed, stabbing her again, this time leaving the knife inside. There was so much blood that it dripped through the floor and the bed, and into a neighbor's living area. Margaret eventually passed out, woke up, and was taken to a hospital. It was later found out that Peter had decapitated the dog, and threw it out the window after he was annoyed by it barking. This was their relationship, Margaret trapped and Peter vile. They married in August of 1969, but separated after a year and divorced in 1971, after Peter was sentenced to prison for 5 years for burglary and forgery. After his release, it didn't take long for him to find someone else to be miserable to, and her name was Sylvia Jeffries, a 30-year-old local nurse. This love story started off similar to the last, a woman falling madly in love with a polite and well-dressed Peter Tobin, yet to only feel trapped and marry Peter in 1973 and live with him in Brighton. Sylvia recalled, When I married him out of fear. I didn't think far enough ahead of what he would do once I was married to him. You have flashbacks of laying on the bed with him, with his arms around your throat. The marriage to Sylvia mirrored the previous one to Margaret. Many nights involved tempers flaring, knives, and near-death encounters, and not for Peter. Sylvia finally felt an urge to leave in 1976, after her daughter, who was 2 days old, passed away. Sylvia believed that her daughter died so that she and her son could escape from Peter. It was as if her daughter spoke to her and said, "It's okay, Mom. I'll be with you soon. Just go." And Sylvia did leave. In fact, after getting home from the hospital, right after her daughter passed, she started to plan her escape. She packed one carrier bag and took a stroller for her son, and then fled to a nearby refuge. As you can probably tell now, a trend is forming in Peter's life. 2 marriages, 2 ended. Unexpectedly, he did end up getting married for a 3rd time, and this marriage wasn't any different, and it ended with his wife leaving in 1990. It was a cold, snowy evening that day in Bathgate, West Lothian, Scotland. 15-year-old Vicky Hamilton and her sister, Sharon, had just gotten back from a weekend filled with shopping and socializing. What was a fun weekend for Vicky turned into one of nervousness and dread as she was about to embark on a trip all by herself. It was a series of bus rides that would take her to her mother's house in Reading, about 15 miles away. After checking to see that she had the right amount of change, she said goodbye to Sharon with a wave from the bus. The first bus stop that she was dropped off to was located in Bathgate. There, she was reportedly lost and confused. She went up to several people asking where the bus stop for Reading was. She was last seen eating chips on a bench, where she befriended a local who offered to share a taxi home with her. A New Age music festival was happening in Liphook, Hampshire, England. Dinah McNicol, an 18-year-old female, and some of her friends were all attending the event. Dinah had just finished up school at Chelmsford County High School, where she completed her A-level exams. She was really looking forward to a break, so she thought this would be a nice way to relax and to keep her mind off the future. The day passed, and Dinah had ended up befriending a boy that was in his mid-20s, so she decided to stay an extra day with him while her friends left the previous day. On Monday, August 5th, the pair, Dinah and this new boy she met, had decided to hitchhike to their homes. This was something Dinah did frequently as a way to travel. Along the way, they had a vehicle give them a lift to a gas station on the A3. There, they waited for another kind Samaritan to pick them up and take them the rest of the way. One did, and after driving for some time, Dinah's male friend, who lived in Surrey, was dropped off at Junction 8 of the M25 near Reigate. The male friend, before getting out of the car, asked if Dinah would like to come with him. She said no. Dinah was never seen again. Peter Tobin was at his flat in Lee Park, Havant, with his son. At this point in time, Tobin separated from his 3rd wife, but had shared custody of their son. On this day, his son was sleeping, and Tobin was watching TV when he heard a knock on the door. It was these 2 14-year-old girls. They were wondering if his neighbor was home. He saw an opportunity and invited the girls inside where they waited in the kitchen. He offered the girls 2 small tablets each and called them blues. However, these were not your innocent daily vitamins. Instead, these pills were amitriptyline, or a form of antidepressant medication. Tobin then proceeded to hold a knife to the girls' throat and force them to drink a substance that consisted of cider and vodka. One rushed over to the bathroom and started to get sick, while the other became dizzy and nauseous and collapsed on the floor. While getting sick, the other girl noticed that her friend collapsed. She rushed over to her, crying, knelt by her side, and tried to wake her up. But it was too late. Tobin slowly approached the girl that was awake, held a bread knife to her throat, and threatened to kill her if she didn't stop crying. He then forced her to take more pills and wine. They were now both unconscious, and Peter dragged them both to his bedroom. Hours passed, until Peter was interrupted by his son, who had woken from a sleep. Peter tended to his son, called his 3rd wife, turned the gas stove on, and finally fled, leaving the 2 girls for dead. He traveled to Brighton, where, under an alias, joined the Jesus Fellowship, an evangelical Christian movement, and became a member of the Stockton community. However, the girls did not die. At approximately 6:25 a.m., One of the girls awoke with a bloodied bandage around her wrist, a tie around her ankle, and her friend next to her. After she tried to wake up her friend, she went home and told her parents what occurred. The police then investigated the residence where the alleged assault took place, found the other girl, and began the search for Peter Tobin. Approximately 9 months later, Peter Tobin was captured after his blue Austin Metro was found. On May 18, 1994, at Winchester Crown Court, Tobin pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 14 years behind bars. While Peter was in prison, the investigations of Dinah McNichol and Vicki Hamilton went cold, and some members of their families felt the pains. Dinah's father, Ian, summarized it best when he said, "I want to know if she's dead or alive before I die myself. I've had a heart attack and strokes. I've been stressed out for years. There is 99% of me that thinks she's abducted and murdered, but I can't grieve because there's no body. I tend to think nice things about her, but sometimes I can't forget about the bad that could have happened to Dinah. I still think of Dinah and my wife Judy every day, and Judy died 27 years ago." Peter Tobin has been released from prison. He begins to slowly become lost in society once more. At this time, little is known about Tobin's whereabouts. He could have been driving one of the 140 cars that he owned over the course of his life, or living in one of the 49 different addresses that he called home, or, finally, not even being Peter Tobin. Peter Tobin was Peter Wilson. Peter Wilson was James Kelly. James Kelly was Paul Semple, and Paul Semple was Peter Tobin. Peter Tobin was known to be many people, and he portrayed himself to be everything but the evil, vicious, cold-hearted person that he really was. So during this time, he probably did what normal people do. It wasn't until September of 2006 that his true nature leaked one final time. Peter Tobin had been working as a church handyman at St. Patrick's Church in Anderston, Glasgow. He assumed the name of Pat McLaughlin, given that he was still listed on the Violent and Sex Offender Register following his 1994 conviction. While he worked there was a 23-year-old Polish girl named Angelika Kluck. Angelika was working at the church as a cleaner to help finance her Scandinavian Studies course at the University of Gdańsk. On September 24, 2006, Tobin and Angelika were in the garage attached to the presbytery. While there, Tobin beat, raped, and stabbed her. He then threw her body in an underground chamber beneath the floorboards of the church. While contained underneath the floor, she was thought to still be alive for a moment in time. Tobin then escaped to London, where he admitted himself to a hospital under a false name with a made-up health condition. Police found her body on September 29th, and Tobin was arrested. In 2007, a 6-week trial resulted from March 23rd to May 4th, 2007. Tobin was found guilty of murdering Kluck and was sentenced to life imprisonment. Following his sentencing, authorities questioned Tobin's every movement throughout his life via Operation Anagram. This investigation led to the uncomfortable discoveries of Dinah McNichol and Vicki Hamilton's bodies. It had been approximately 15 years since their initial disappearances. Both bodies were found at Tobin's former residence on 50 Irvine Drive in Margate, Kent. Dinah was found buried under concrete in the garden, wrapped in 16 heavy-duty refuse bags. Vicki was found in 2 bags. Neighbors thought that he had dug up a sandpit for his young son. Peter was tried for both killings in separate trials, and was found guilty of both, and received his 2nd and 3rd life sentence. For the families of Dinah and Vicki, they received the closure they needed after 15 years. Peter slowly rotted away in his prison cell. He was barely eating and basically seemed at death's door. However, he found great pleasure in watching news stories and documentaries about himself and the crimes he was guilty for. He was said to have had a bad temper, and he reflected on what he did with no regret. His cellmate, Sean Moynihan, grew tired of this. One night in 2015, Sean, a 2-time rapist, had enough. Peter was sleeping, and Sean was standing over Peter with something sharp. Sean then slashed Peter Tobin, leaving a 20-centimeter laceration running down the right side of his face and throat, and was ultimately scarred forever. Sean was later interviewed on why he did it, and he said, "I am never getting out, and Tobin has been annoying me for months with his attitude towards his offenses and his refusal to tell anyone where the rest of his victims' bodies are." Years passed, and in October of 2022, Peter was taken to the Royal Infirmary by ambulance after collapsing in his cell in HMP Edinburgh. While at the hospital, Peter was seen handcuffed to the bed with his head scrunched to his chest. He ultimately died on Saturday, October 8th, 2022, at age 76. His ashes were thrown in the ocean by the local authorities after no relative came forward to claim them. After hearing of Peter Tobin's passing, Michael Hamilton, Vicky Hamilton's father, laid 12 roses at her graveside and told her, "Tobin's in hell, you're in heaven."